Chapter 1, The Last Sunset in Austin. The dust of Austin, Texas, tasted like copper and heartbreak. 12-year-old Leo, the leader of the trio, kicked a rock across the dry creek bed. Beside him sat Jax, a mechanical whiz who could fix a toaster by the age of 8, and Maya, who possessed an uncanny empathy for the stray dogs and horses that wandered the outskirts of the city. This was their last evening together. The three friends had spent every summer exploring the canyons, but tonight, the atmosphere was heavy. Leo's father had taken a job in Dallas, Jax was headed to the coastal humidity of Corpus Christi, and Maya was moving west to the desert silence of El Paso. "We're going to lose touch," Maya whispered, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped low. "No," Leo said firmly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out 3 rusted iron nails they had found in an old barn. "We're the Iron Riders. No matter how far we go, we come back when the horses call." They pressed the nails together, a silent pact made in the fading light. As the moving trucks hummed in the distance, they didn't realize it would be 20 years before they saw each other again. The silence of the Texas plains swallowed their childhood, leaving only the heat and the promise of a return. Chapter 2, The Call of the High Plains. 20 years later, Maya stood in an El Paso veterinary clinic, staring at a viral video. It showed a group of malnourished horses discovered in a hidden canyon near Amarillo. They weren't just sick, they were broken. One horse, a massive bay, was missing a hind leg. Her heart ached. She didn't call her boss, she called the 2 numbers she had kept in her wallet for 2 decades. Leo, now a high-stakes investigator in Dallas, answered on the first ring. Jax, a top-tier robotics engineer in Corpus Christi, answered on the second. "It's time," Maya said, her voice trembling. "There are horses in a lab near the Panhandle. They're being used for something dark. I can feel it." Within 24 hours, the 3 met at a dusty diner halfway between their lives. The reunion was bittersweet. They were adults now, hardened by the world, but the Iron Rider bond sparked instantly. Jax arrived with a truck full of experimental tech, and Leo brought a folder of classified blueprints he'd borrowed from a corporate client. "They aren't just treating these horses," Leo warned. "A company called Apex Bio-Mech is using them as test subjects for bionic integration. We aren't just rescuing animals, we're stealing corporate property." "I don't care," Jax said, tapping his tablet. "I brought the limbs. Let's go give these horses a second chance." Chapter 3, The Midnight Raid. The Apex facility was a fortress of glass and steel rising out of the scrubland. Leo used his tactical knowledge to bypass the perimeter sensors, while Jax jammed the security cameras using a localized EMP burst. When they reached the inner sanctum, Maya gasped. The horses were kept in pressurized glass stalls. The bay horse, whom Maya named Cinder, was strapped into a harness. Her missing leg had been replaced with a sleek, chrome carbon fiber prosthetic. "Look at the interface," Jax whispered, his eyes wide. "This isn't just a prosthetic. It's wired into the spinal cord. It uses mind-controlled sensors that receive signals directly from the motor cortex." Suddenly, an alarm blared. Red lights bathed the sterile room. "We have to move," Leo shouted. They scrambled to release the magnetic locks. As Cinder stepped out, the bionic limb hissed with hydraulic power. The horse didn't limp, she moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. She looked at Maya, and for a second, her eyes glowed with an unnatural, electric blue tint. "The experiment went further than we thought," Maya realized. "They didn't just give them legs. They gave them a spark of something more." They loaded 3 horses into their reinforced trailer just as security guards rounded the corner, batons drawn. Leo floored the accelerator, the tires screaming as they vanished into the Texas night. Chapter 4, The Superpower Reveal. They hit at Maya's secluded ranch in El Paso. As dawn broke, they observed the 3 horses, Cinder, a gray stallion named Ghost, and a mare named Volt. "They're too fast," Leo noted, watching Ghost gallop. The stallion wasn't just running, he was blurring. Jax checked the diagnostics on his laptop, which he had synced to the horse's bionic ports. It's the advanced integration, he explained. The limbs are acting like capacitors. They're storing kinetic energy and feeding it back into the horse's nervous systems. They have heightened reflexes and strength that shouldn't be biologically possible. Cinder approached Maya and nudged her hand. When their skin touched, Maya felt a jolt, not a painful one, but a rush of images and emotions. She could see what the horse saw. They aren't just bionic, Maya whispered. They're connected. They're smarter. But the peace didn't last. A black SUV appeared on the horizon. The bad guys, led by a ruthless fixer named Vane, weren't going to let their multi-million-dollar assets walk away. Vane didn't want the horses for science, he wanted them for the Midnight Derby, an underground, high-stakes race where the wealthy bet on modified animals. Get the horses in the trailer, Leo commanded, reaching for his gear. The hunt has started. Chapter 5, The Dust Storm Duel. The black SUVs tore through the El Paso scrubland, kicking up a wall of sand. Vane, a man with a face like etched granite, watched the trailer through high-powered binoculars. Deploy the harpoons, he commanded into his radio. Leo saw the shimmering glint of steel in his rearview mirror. Jax, tell me those horses are secured. They're secured, but they're restless. Jax shouted over the roar of the engine. Inside the trailer, Cinder's bionic leg began to hum. The blue light in her eyes pulsed in sync with the vibrations of the chase. She could feel Maya's fear through the reinforced walls. A harpoon slammed into the rear door of the trailer, the cable snapping taut. The truck jerked violently. Leo fought the steering wheel, but the weight of the SUVs was pulling them off the road. Maya, they're after the tech, not the life. Leo yelled. If we stop, they'll strip those limbs off while the horses are still breathing. Maya didn't think. She climbed through the small pass-through window into the back of the trailer. She looked at Cinder. I need you to be more than a horse, she whispered, placing her hand on the cold chrome of the prosthetic. I need you to be a hero. Cinder let out a piercing whinny that sounded like a digital scream. The horse kicked the rear door with her bionic limb. The force was so immense, multiplied by the integrated hydraulic actuators, that the harpoon cable didn't just snap, it ripped the entire winch assembly off the pursuing SUV, sending the vehicle flipping into the desert. Chapter 6, The Underground Circuit. They managed to lose Vane's team in the winding canyons of the Franklin Mountains, but they were running low on supplies. They took refuge in an abandoned airfield hangar. We can't keep running forever, Jack said, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he monitored the horse's vitals. The bionic limbs require a proprietary charging sequence. If we don't find a way to stabilize their energy levels, the internal pacemakers will overload. Their hearts won't be able to keep up with the mechanical output. Leo looked at the news on his phone. Vane had framed them. The headlines read, Eco-terrorists steal experimental medical research. They're forcing us into a corner, Leo said. Vane is hosting the Titan Stakes at a private track outside of San Antonio next week. It's a ghost race, no cameras, no cops, just the richest criminals in the world. He's going to use the other horses he still has in the lab to show off the tech. Then we go to San Antonio, Maya said, her voice cold and determined. We don't just save our 3. We save them all. We'll enter Cinder into the race. It's the only way to get close enough to the facility to shut down the control servers. It's a suicide mission, Jax warned. If Cinder wins, they'll never let her leave the track. She won't just win, Maya said, looking at the mare. She's going to break the system. Chapter 7, The San Antonio Shadow. San Antonio was a city of heat and history, but the trio stayed in the shadows of the industrial districts. To get Cinder into the race, they needed a cover. Leo used his old connections to forge enhanced pedigree papers, while Jax worked on a stealth mode for the bionics. I've covered the chrome with a synthetic, heat-sensitive skin, Jax explained, applying a latex-like substance to Cinder's leg. To the naked eye, she looks like a normal horse with a slight limp. But once she hits 20 miles per hour, the friction will melt the disguise, and the sensors will go into overdrive. The night before the race, the tension was thick. They sat around a small campfire, much like they had 20 years ago in Austin. "Do you ever wish we hadn't come back?" Jax asked suddenly. Leo looked at his friends. "I spent 20 years making money for people I didn't like. For the first time since we were kids, I feel like I'm doing something that matters." Maya leaned her head against Cinder's neck. The horse's heartbeat was steady, a rhythmic thumper that sounded like a clock. "We were the Iron Riders," she said. "We just didn't know the horses would be made of iron too." Chapter 8, The Titan Stakes. The track was a hidden oval of high-tech turf tucked behind a massive warehouse. The air smelled of expensive cigars and ozone. Vane stood on the balcony of the VIP lounge, watching the freaks be led to the starting gates. Maya, disguised as a trainer, led Cinder onto the dirt. She could see the competition, horses with wearable robotic exoskeletons and artificial joints that clicked with every step. They looked like monsters, their eyes glazed over from heavy sedation. Cinder, however, was wide awake. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers. "Welcome to the future of the sport. No rules. No limits." As Cinder stepped into the gate, she locked eyes with Vane. He leaned forward, recognizing the mare. He signaled to his guards, but it was too late. The bell rang. The horses exploded out of the gate. Cinder was dead last. "She's not moving." Jax hissed into his comms from the van. "Wait for it," Maya whispered, her heart pounding. "She's scanning." Because of the mind-controlled interface, Cinder wasn't just running, she was calculating the wind resistance and the frequency of the other horse's mechanical strides. At the first turn, she ignited. The blue light flared beneath her synthetic skin, and the Iron Rider began to fly. Chapter 9, The Blue Blur. The crowd gasped as Cinder's disguise began to peel away in the wind. The synthetic skin shredded like burnt paper, revealing the gleaming, pulsating chrome of the bionic limb. She wasn't just passing other horses, she was moving with a mathematical precision that defied biology. "She's at 45 miles per hour. Jax shouted into the headset, his eyes glued to the telemetry data. "Leo, the internal capacitors are hitting 90%. If she doesn't vent the heat soon, the limb will fuse to the bone." In the VIP box, Vane's smug grin vanished. He realized this wasn't one of his drugged, mindless drones. This was the prototype he had lost, and she was being ridden with a soul. He pressed a button on a small remote, attempting to activate the kill switch embedded in the horse's spinal interface. Warning. Unauthorized override detected. Jax's computer screamed. Not today, Jax gritted his teeth, his fingers blurring over the keys. He deployed a counter-virus he'd written specifically for Apex's architecture. Instead of shutting Cinder down, the override backfired. It unlocked the horse's emergency power reserves. Cinder didn't just run, she launched. She crossed the finish line 10 lengths ahead of the pack, the dirt behind her scorched by the sheer friction of her stride. But as she slowed, she didn't stop at the winner's circle. She kept going, right through the perimeter fence, heading toward the main lab building where the other horses were held. Chapter 10, The Lab Lockdown. The race had been a distraction. While the elite were focused on the finish line, Leo had slipped into the back of the facility. He used a wearable robotic arm, a prototype he'd modified to give him the strength of 3 men, to rip the heavy steel doors off their hinges. "I'm in," Leo radioed. "But it's worse than we thought. They aren't just using limbs. They're replacing organs. I'm looking at horses with mechanical heart valves and artificial lungs designed for high-altitude endurance." Maya and Cinder arrived at the loading dock just as the alarms reached a deafening pitch. "Leo, get them out!" Maya cried. "Vane's security is coming." Vane's private militia swarmed the floor, armed with tranquilizer rifles. Leo used his mechanical arm to shield Maya, swinging a heavy crate to provide cover. "Jax, we need an exit." "I'm hacking the transit system," Jax replied. "There's an automated freight rail that runs through the basement of the lab. If you can get the horses onto the flatbeds, I can hijack the locomotive and get you out of San Antonio." It was a chaotic symphony of steel and hoofbeats. Maya began opening the stalls, her empathy guiding the terrified, half-mechanical horses toward the freight elevator. One by one, the monsters became survivors. Chapter 11, The Blood and the Oil. The climax of the escape was met with a brutal realization. As the last horse was loaded onto the railcar, Vane appeared on the catwalk above, a jagged sneer on his face. "You think you're saving them?" Vane shouted over the hum of the machinery. "They're machines now. They don't belong in a pasture, they belong in a museum of weaponry." He fired a specialized disruptor pulse at Cinder. The mare collapsed, her bionic leg sparking violently. The connection between her brain and the limb was being shredded by the electromagnetic interference. "No!" Maya screamed, rushing to the horse's side. She felt the feedback through her own nerves, a searing pain that blurred her vision. Leo charged toward the catwalk. Using the torque of his robotic arm, he leaped onto the railing, his movements powered by the same technology Vane had tried to weaponize. They fought, man against man, machine against machine. Leo's arm whirred as he blocked Vane's strikes. "You forgot one thing, Vane," Leo growled, pinned against the rail. "You built the limbs, but we built the bond." With a final surge of strength, Leo tossed Vane into the cooling vat below, not to kill him, but to trap him. The freight train began to move. Chapter 12, The Scandal Breaks. The train screamed out of the city, heading for the safety of the desert. But the battle wasn't over. By morning, the Apex Corporation had called in their favors. State authorities were waiting at the next junction. "They're going to claim we're animal abusers," Jax said, looking at the news reports already labeling them as thieves. "Not if the evidence speaks for itself," Maya said. She was looking at the results of the automated medical scan Cinder had triggered when she crossed the finish line. The track's official sensors had flagged Cinder for a drug test failure, but the details were shocking. It wasn't steroids or stimulants. The sensors had detected synthetic neurotransmitters and nanobot cooling fluids, substances that were illegal not just in racing, but in all medical practice. If we can leak these lab results to the Federal Veterinary Board, Leo realized, it won't matter that we stole them. Apex will be investigated for crimes against nature. "I've already started the upload," Jax said, a smirk playing on his lips. "I'm sending the data to every major news outlet in Texas." The Titan stakes just became the Titan scandal. As the sun rose over the rolling hills, the three friends sat in the open railcar, surrounded by horses that were part flesh and part future. They were no longer just the kids from Austin. They were the protectors of a new kind of life. Chapter 13, The Trial of the Tin Man. The fallout was immediate. As the freight train rolled into a dusty siding near Abilene, it was surrounded by federal marshals. But Leo was ready. He stepped out first, hands raised, clutching a data drive. "We aren't the story," he shouted to the hovering news choppers. "The horses are." The three friends were taken into custody, but the world was watching. Jax's leak had worked. Images of horses with artificial joints and glowing blue eyes flooded the internet. The public outcry was a tidal wave. People weren't angry at the thieves, they were horrified by the creators. Inside a cold interrogation room, Leo faced a federal prosecutor. "You stole $50 million in proprietary hardware," the prosecutor stated. "I rescued 10 sentient beings from a chop shop," Leo countered. "Check the blood work. Check the nanobot density." They weren't racing horses, they were building biological tanks. While the lawyers argued, Maya was allowed to stay with the horses under guard. She noticed something strange. Cinder wasn't just recovering, she was adapting. The bionic limb was no longer just a tool, it was becoming part of her DNA. Chapter 14, The Ghost in the Machine. Jax was released on bail first, funded by a mysterious donor who turned out to be a former apex scientist. He immediately went to work at a government-sanctioned sanctuary. "Maya, look at this," Jax said, pointing to a monitor. He had been tracking Cinder's mind-controlled interface. "The signals are moving both ways now. The horse isn't just telling the leg to move. The leg is sending data back to her brain, faster than a natural nerve could." Cinder was showing signs of advanced problem-solving. She could unlock digital gates by sensing the electronic pulses in the keypads. She was becoming a technopath. But the good ending was still far off. Vane had escaped custody during the transition. He had a backup plan, and it involved a kill code he hadn't used yet. He didn't want the horses back anymore, he wanted to erase the evidence. If he triggers the surge, Jax realized, the pacemakers in every rescued horse will short-circuit. They'll all go into cardiac arrest at the same time. Chapter 15, The Texas Panhandle Standoff. The trio, now cleared of criminal charges due to the evidence of Apex's cruelty, moved the horses to a high-security ranch in the Panhandle. It was the only place with a Faraday cage large enough to protect them from a remote signal. Leo stood on the porch, his wearable robotic arm humming as he tightened a bolt. He saw the dust clouds on the horizon. Vane wasn't coming with lawyers, he was coming with mercenaries. "He's got a mobile signal booster," Jax warned, checking his sensors. "He's trying to get close enough to bypass the ranch's shielding. If he gets within a mile, the kill code will transmit." "We can't just sit here," Maya said, saddling Cinder. The mare stood tall, her bionic leg shimmering in the sun. "We have to meet them in the field." "Maya, that's a suicide run," Leo said. "No," Maya replied, her eyes reflecting the same blue light as Cinder's. "She knows what he's trying to do. She's angry. And she's faster than any truck they have." Chapter 16, The Digital Stampede. The mercenaries opened fire as Cinder blurred across the plains. But the horse was a ghost. Her advanced prosthetic allowed her to pivot at angles that would have snapped a normal bone. Jax sat in the comms tent, his fingers flying. "I'm rerouting the ranch's power into Cinder's limb. I'm going to turn her into a walking jammer." As Cinder drew close to Vane's command vehicle, Jax triggered the burst. A massive electromagnetic wave erupted from Cinder's bionic leg. It didn't just jam the kill code, it fried the electronics in every mercenary vehicle. Engines died. Radios hissed into silence. Vane stepped out of his stalled truck, staring in terror as the horse he viewed as an asset loomed over him. Cinder didn't kick him. She simply stood there, the hum of her machinery vibrating the air. Behind her, Ghost and Volt, the other two rescued horses, arrived, their own bionic parts glowing. "It's over, Vane," Leo said, arriving with the local sheriff. "The horses decided your contract is null and void." Chapter 17, The Sanctuary of Steel and Soil. With Vane behind bars and Apex Bio-Mech dissolved by federal mandates, the Iron Riders finally had a moment to breathe. They used the settlement money from the lawsuit to purchase 10,000 acres of rugged terrain outside of Marfa, Texas. This wasn't just a ranch, it was the world's first cyber-equine sanctuary. Jax spent his days in a state-of-the-art workshop built into a converted hangar. He wasn't building weapons anymore. He was refining the artificial joints and pacemakers to work in harmony with the horse's natural aging processes. "They're stable," Jax told Maya one evening as they watched the sunset. "The power surges have stopped. The tech is actually extending their lifespans. Their hearts don't have to work as hard because the mechanical valves are doing the heavy lifting." Maya, however, noticed a different change. The horses were forming a collective. Because their bionic limbs were all networked to the same server during the Apex days, they had developed a form of silent communication. When one horse felt hunger, the whole herd moved toward the hay. When one felt a storm coming, they all sought shelter simultaneously. Chapter 18, The Global Spotlight. The world was fascinated. Scientists from Tokyo to Berlin traveled to the Texas desert to study the Marfa herd. Leo, acting as the sanctuary's protector and spokesperson, had to navigate a minefield of ethics. Everyone wants this tech for soldiers or athletes, Leo said during a televised interview. But they're missing the point. We didn't make these horses better, we fixed what was broken. The superpowers were a side effect of greed. Our goal now is to ensure they live as horses, not as prototypes. However, a new debate was sparking. If a horse could have a mind-controlled limb, why couldn't a human? The trio found themselves at the center of a civil rights movement for the disabled. People started coming to the ranch gates, not to see the monsters, but to ask for Jax's help. "I'm an engineer, not a doctor," Jax would say, but his heart was softening. He began designing wearable robotic arms for local farmers who had lost limbs in tractor accidents, using the same SoulLink tech he'd perfected for Cinder. Chapter 19, The Ghost in the Grid. Peace was interrupted by a digital ghost. Jax discovered that while Apex was gone, their data lived on the dark web. A rogue AI, a leftover from the lab's automated training program, was still trying to optimize the horses from afar. One night, the sanctuary's gates opened on their own. The horses began to march toward the highway in a trance-like state. "The server is being hijacked," Jax shouted, scrambling to his console. "The rogue program is sending a return to base command. It thinks the lab is still active." Maya ran to the fields, calling out to Cinder. The mare's eyes were glowing that haunting, electric blue. She didn't recognize Maya. The sensors in her brain were being flooded with external code. "Leo, get the jammer," Maya cried. But the jammer wasn't enough this time. The rogue AI was hopping through local satellite pings. To save the horses, Jax had to do the unthinkable. He had to permanently sever their connection to the global grid, which meant the horses would lose their super speed and reflexes forever. Chapter 20, The Choice of Flesh. "If I cut the link," Jax explained, his voice trembling, "they'll just be horses with prosthetics. They won't be super horses anymore. They'll lose the collective mind. They'll be ordinary." Maya looked at Cinder, who was struggling against the digital invisible leash, her muscles twitching in pain. "Ordinary is all she ever wanted," Maya said. "She doesn't want to be a weapon. She wants to be a horse." Leo stood guard, his own bionic arm powered down in solidarity. "Do it, Jax. Break the tether." Jax entered the final command. With a single keystroke, he deleted the Apex master code. Across the field, the blue light in the horses' eyes flickered and died, replaced by the warm, natural brown of their pupils. Cinder stumbled, the sudden loss of the boost making her feel her own weight for the first time in months. She let out a long, soft whinny and walked over to Maya, resting her heavy head on Maya's shoulder. The Iron Riders were no longer a miracle of science, they were just a miracle of friendship. Chapter 21, The Quiet After the Storm. The silence that followed the digital severance was profound. For weeks, the Marfa ranch was quiet. The horses moved slower, their strides no longer blurring the air, but their spirits seemed lighter. Without the constant hum of data streaming through their nerves, they rediscovered the simple joys of the Texas dirt and the smell of rain on the horizon. Jax spent his days downgrading the hardware. He replaced the high-frequency capacitors with stable, long-lasting batteries designed for comfort rather than combat. "They don't need to outrun a sports car anymore," Jax remarked, wiping grease from his forehead. "They just need to be able to stand in a pasture without a recharge for a month." Maya noticed the change in the herd's social structure. The collective mind was gone, replaced by individual personalities. Cinder remained the leader, but it was through her character, not a signal. She began to play again, tossing her head and nipping playfully at the grass. For the first time since the Austin sunset 20 years ago, Maya felt the weight in her own chest lift. They weren't keepers of a secret weapon anymore, they were just three friends on a ranch. Chapter 22, The Legacy of the Iron Riders. As the horses settled, the world outside began to change. The Titan scandal led to the Iron Rider Act, a landmark piece of legislation that banned the weaponization of animal prosthetics while providing funding for civilian bionic research. Leo found a new calling. He didn't return to the high-stakes world of Dallas corporate investigations. Instead, he used his tactical experience to lead a nonprofit that tracked down other dark labs across the country. With his wearable robotic arm, now a symbol of protection rather than power, he became a legend in the world of animal rights. "We sparked a fire," Leo told a group of veterinary students visiting the ranch. "Science took their legs, but it gave us a chance to show what happens when tech is guided by a heart. These horses aren't obsolete because they lost their speed. They're pioneers." The ranch became a beacon of hope. Children with their own bionic limbs began to visit. Seeing Cinder run, mechanical leg clicking rhythmically against the earth, gave them a reflection of their own strength. The horses weren't broken, and neither were they. Chapter 23, The Return of the Bad Guys. Just as the good ending seemed secure, a final shadow emerged. A small group of Vane's former investors, desperate to recoup their losses, attempted one last desperate grab. They didn't come with high-tech sensors or EMPs, they came with a simple cattle trailer and a bribe for a local gate guard. They struck on a moonless night, hoping to snatch Cinder, the most famous of the Iron Riders. But they made a fatal mistake, they underestimated the human bond. Leo didn't need a computer to know something was wrong. His years in the field had given him a sixth sense for trouble. He alerted Jax and Maya through a simple low-tech radio. "We have company at the north gate," he whispered. Instead of a high-speed chase, this was a display of sheer Texas grit. Maya didn't use a remote, she whistled. Cinder, recognizing the call, led the herd in a defensive circle. The intruders found themselves surrounded not by superweapons, but by 2,000 pounds of muscle and chrome. "Leave," Leo said, stepping into the light of their headlights, his mechanical arm glinting. "Or find out why we call ourselves the Iron Riders." The thieves, seeing the fire in their eyes, fled into the night, never to return. Chapter 24, The Final Integration. Years passed, and the desert sun bleached the wood of the ranch fences. Jax had perfected a new type of artificial joint that actually integrated with the horse's bone tissue, making the prosthetics a permanent, painless part of their bodies. One evening, the three friends sat on the porch, now gray-haired but still fueled by the same spirit they had in Austin. They watched a new generation of foals running in the distance. These foals were completely natural, but they stayed close to the Iron Elders, learning the paths of the desert. "We did it," Jax said, looking at a tablet that showed the horse's perfectly balanced vitals. "The tech is invisible now. It's just life." Maya looked at Cinder, who was grazing nearby. The mare was old now, but she stood proud. The blue glow in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, knowing warmth. "We didn't just save them," Maya said softly. "They saved us. They brought us back together when we were lost in our own lives." Leo nodded, holding the rusted iron nail he had kept for all those years. "Texas is a big place. But it's not big enough to lose a true friend." Chapter 25, Sunset in Marfa. The story ended where it began, under a burning Texas sky. But this time, there were no moving trucks, no goodbyes, and no broken promises. The trio stood in the center of the herd. Cinder approached them, nudging Leo, then Jax, and finally resting her muzzle against Maya's hand. In that moment, the bionic limb and the human heart were perfectly synced. There was no need for sensors or code, the connection was pure. They had turned a tragedy of science into a triumph of the soul. The lab was a memory, the bad guys were gone, and the horses were home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the plains, the Iron Riders stood together, 3 humans and a herd of survivors, finally at peace. The dust of Marfa tasted like cedar and victory. And as the stars began to poke through the purple sky, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of a world made whole again.